Happy signing day. Oh, wait. Another casualty that used to be a staple. That's a casualty to the new college football evolving landscape. But we do welcome you back into another edition of Kolby's Corner here, coming live from a still snowy Blacksburg, Virginia on Wednesday, February 4th, year of our Lord 2026. However, we were able to talk to coaches on this signing day. No players might have officially announced their national letter of intent to go to Virginia Tech, but we got to talk to the coordinator, so we'll get into some reactions from that, talk some facility upgrades, specifically those LED lights that Doug Bowman broke the other night, and then we'll hop straight into a question and answer. I know people are still jumping in here, but off the top, first off, need to start off by saying profusely apologize for the audio debacle that happened earlier, live streaming the press conference from this feed. Appreciate everyone sticking out with me, but it will not happen again. First time live streaming a press conference, had issues with the audio, figured it out towards the end. So apologies again. I know people will join in, but that's something we're going to have worked on and fixed moving forward. Also, make sure to go check out vtscoop.com. Run the VIP promo over there. 2 months for $1, 50% off annual subscription. Offer ends February 5th. You got one more day. We're dropping VIP intel promos. I mean, in this time when the guys are in the weight room, there's a ton of stuff still going on. I know it goes dead for recruiting, so recruiting's a little down, but we will have team scoop and intel going into spring practice and ahead of that, as well with facilities, talking about LED lights, heating the indoor, baseball losing the naming rights to the field. All of that and more over on vtscoop.com. Great value. You can get 2 months for $1 or 50% off your annual subscription. Make sure to go check it out. Also, while you're here, subscribe to the channel down below. Click the bell, like the video. It helps me out a ton. It's free. A ton of college football content and Virginia Tech content year-round. So make sure to subscribe. Check it out while you're here. But jumping right into it, first off, I think it's important to say, talking to James Franklin, Brent Pry back as defensive coordinator, offensive coordinator Ty Howell, and special teams coordinator Doug Shearer. Initial reactions from the press conference today for Virginia Tech. Brent Pry returns, and there has to be some scar tissue there. The last time he stood at that podium in the team room was after the ODU game where, you're down 28-0 at halftime, and that was the last time he'd been addressed at that podium in Virginia Tech colors. So I think it was also really important to see how that press conference started, where Franklin was very clear laying out that staff hires were about fit and function, not friendships. Started off by joking that he has 3 or 4 friends he doesn't need to coach with his. I think Brent Pry would qualify as one of those 3 to 4, though. But, I mean, he made a pretty clear stance that he does not hire friends. He hires coaches who puts his program, right now Virginia Tech, in the best position to win. So he said every hire was made with player development and the overall success of the program in mind. And I think you can see that with a lot of guys. And I think it was also really important to see when they talked about Brent Pry that he was discussed as a defensive coordinator even before Franklin officially took the VT job. So, being linked to Arkansas and Florida State and some of these different jobs, when it was still a little bit more murky, still kind of had penciled in Brent Pry as someone he was going to want to come with him and call defensive plays. So I thought that was really interesting. Obviously, they had the long-standing professional relationship and friendship from East Stroudsburg to Vanderbilt to Penn State. Franklin re-emphasized in the video that he had up on their YouTube channel talking about Pry's humility. He really doubled down on that today, talking about Pry's humility and returning in a not head coach role. When you walk past the head coach's offense and go into the defensive coaching room, it has to be a little bit humbling. But at the same time, he also highlighted how sometimes he's even a little bit more envious that now Brent Pry can just be more of a true ball coach. In this day and age of college football, a head coach has become a CEO. You have to handle everything from player evaluations to boosters to facilities. In Virginia Tech's case, it just is a lot more than just on-field product. So that's obviously what you're searching for. That's why you get paid the big bucks. But it certainly can be a little wearing on the soul. And all these guys at the end of the day get into the profession to coach football. And sometimes you feel like you can get detracted from that. So I think that was a massive wave of relief for Pry, that he can get back to just doing what he loves. I also thought it was interesting. We had heard some of this, but Franklin doubled down and said that when Pry was introduced in front of the team, that he was going to be the defensive coordinator, they gave Pry a standing ovation. I remember when Pry was announced as a defensive coordinator, I was sitting there in church, and literally the night before, I was talking to a player, and he said, we still like Pry. And they honestly wish Pry called the defense last year. And I think you even heard some of that in Pry talking about taking 75% of what they did at Penn State and his scheme as opposed to what Chris Marv and Sam Seifkes did. So definitely reverting back to his old ways. And I'll turn back to that 2022 season when Brent Pry called the defense up until the Liberty game. With that roster that was very barren of talent, had not been flipped, to coach that defense to a top 45 overall defense, very impressive job. And that was only a couple cycles ago. They've pretty dramatically increased the talent profile. Still a ways to go, but I don't think that tech is outdated. So, 4-man front is what he runs. I mean, obviously didn't go into many details there. But Pry, I think he doubled down and said he's enjoying being back in a role that's just focused on coaching football. I feel like that came out abundantly clear in his talking. Also, I thought it was interesting the coordinator structure that Franklin said. He does not believe in the floating or walk-around coordinators, something that was interesting. Obviously Sam Seifkes did that a year ago. And I think you could see some of that tie in with James Franklin and his experiment with Jim Knowles at Penn State. Jim Knowles brought in for a couple $1 million to be the defensive coordinator. And I think, Franklin could realistically, not going to say this out loud, but it feels like that hire and going out and the splash hire might have cost him his job. And that was a situation where he didn't really probably learn from it and doesn't feel comfortable. Once his coordinator's coaching a position, doesn't want them that walk-around guy. And I think you could tie some of that to Jim Knowles. He just believes that floating coordinators lose touch with how much players are actually installing. And you could see parts of that for sure. So specifically for Virginia Tech, Brent Pry being the defensive coordinator, he'll coach linebackers, and the offensive coordinator, Ty Howell, will coach tight ends. And clearly he's one of the best tight ends coaches. Tying in, hearing very, very solid early returns from Penn State, former 5-star high school recruit Luke Reynolds. I know there's no spring install. It's very early, but hearing very positive things on the front of Luke Reynolds, as well with obviously Ethan Grunkmeyer. But Luke Reynolds sounds as advertised here relatively early. Some notes on the defensive staff that came out. Obviously, Sean Spencer hired as a defensive line coach after success at Texas A&M. Franklin and Pryor reuniting with Spencer after previous time together at Penn State. They have a great friendship as well. So I know you're not hiring your friends. They're also highly successful, but it does work out when you're friends. He has a heavy emphasis on pass rush when you look at where Texas A&M ranked in pressure rate, top 3 for the past 2 seasons, I believe. Tackles for loss, getting offenses off schedule. You bring back Anthony Midget. He was going to come in as a cornerbacks coach, shift him to safeties when the safeties coach search sort of fell through. Virginia Tech alum, former team captain at Virginia Tech, had NFL experience coaching under Bill O'Brien, coaching under Mike Tomlin, coaching under Mike Vrabel, who's coaching the Super Bowl now. So there's a ton of experience. Highlighted Nick Perry to be coach corners, Alabama, Arkansas, time in the NFL with the Seahawks. Someone where he highlighted working for Nick Saban, especially the defensive back position. Got to feel pretty confident in his roots of football. And then as well with Vic Hall, made a reference to Gretna, Virginia, his recruiting grounds, a former Virginia Cavalier, also noted that in the press conference. But he's hired to coach Nichols and serve as the defensive recruiting coordinator, which I thought was pretty interesting that Vic Hall got the DRC tag. As he was with him at Penn State, I believe, as a GA, then jumped over to Rutgers full-time in a position and then relinks up with James Franklin a little bit closer to his stomping ground. So we'll see how that plays out, being the defensive recruiting coordinator. I thought that tag was a little interesting as they finally dropped the staff announcements today. If you're just joining, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like the video, drop a question in the live chat, going through some press conference reactions, and then we're going to jump into some Q&A. So make sure to drop any questions you have in the live chat. But moving right along with some more thoughts from the press conference. And overall, like the press conference, I think Franklin spoke for 25 minutes. His opening statement was close to 13 minutes. So I think he only took like 5 questions, a lot of filibuster in there. And not to say, program defining, you're still introducing yourself to the media members, to the team itself. I mean, being out on the road recruiting, he's only been around the full team, but for a couple of days, still introducing himself to the fans. So not a ton of tangible things, but definitely a good touch point here on February 4th when there's not much to report, I guess, at the end of the day. But yeah, I thought that was good hearing different things from Ty Howell, some of the offensive staff highlights. So he was named the offensive coordinator, had limited play calling experience at Penn State, so has never been a full-time play caller, but has served in that role in the interim. But Franklin highlighted how it was important that he has a shared vision with Howell on offense, which I think, you can really point back to James Franklin and the end of his Penn State tenure. You bring in Andy Kotelnicki, who is that surefire, top of the board, everyone wants coordinator. You bring in Jim Knowles, coming off a national championship season. These really high-priced, explosive minds, and you see the guys that he's had success with before were people and personnel that he was familiar with, Brent Pry being developed up with him. So I think that's sort of a shift in mindset. Okay, let's stick to what works, even in an evolving landscape. Let's not succumb to outside pressure of who's the right guy to hire. Let me control the staff. So I thought that was interesting, but really doubled down that him and Hal share a vision. Said, pretty basic things about the offense, but he said quarterback-friendly offense, which you would expect as an offensive coordinator. Leaned in the offensive line, which you'd also expect as an offensive coordinator. It starts with the 5 guys up front. I don't know if I've ever heard an offensive coordinator not say that. And they want explosive plays. So those touch points, I think every offensive coordinator in the country would want to get behind. But looking outside of that at the offensive staff, Matt Moore was retained as the offensive line coach. So retention helped keep 4 of those returning starters. So that retention was really big to keep those guys, keep a Kyle Altuner, Laith Ganem, some of those other names. As well with it, if you weren't watching the show on Monday, an interesting stat, Matt Moore, amongst active offensive line coaches in college, has the 3rd most first-team and second-team All-Americans that he's coached. Really impressive figure that goes under the radar, and they're only increasing the talent level that's coming in. So very impressive. Fontel Mines was retained as wide receiver coach. As we reported on the show, he doubled down and said that he tried to hire Franklin a couple cycles ago at Penn State and, almost backhandedly said that caused Fontel Mines to get a big raise at Virginia Tech. So they had familiarity. That was a cycle when Penn State went out and backfilled Marcus Hagans, I believe. Danny O'Brien hired his quarterback coach, someone James Franklin has a great connection with, was his offensive coordinator at Maryland. Now coaching quarterbacks, has a relationship with Ethan Grunkmeyer, so that's a pretty seamless fit, the transfer quarterback from Penn State. So has strong relationships with guys like Bryce Baker as well coming out of the portal. Norville McKenzie he touched on. I think this is a really underrated hire for the staff. Running back coach and assistant head coach. They crossed paths just very briefly at Vanderbilt, but someone that's recruited and developed at a really high level. And then lastly, Doug Shearer, special teams coordinator coming from UConn. He had some pretty great anecdotes. He didn't have a connection to James Franklin, but was in Ty Howell's wedding. So his touch point and connection was with the offensive coordinator, Ty Howell. Went into that, described that relationship, and also talked about how he understands the reverence of special teams at Virginia Tech and said this is something we want to highlight. We're going to make new traditions, but we want to give that reverence, and seemed very about his business. So originally up from UConn, coming from UConn, I thought laid out pretty good special teams plan. Obviously, talked about John Love returning as a kicker. That's a pretty good fail-safe, but it'll be interesting to see how that devolves. A little bit on the support staff, talking about strength staff led by Chuck Losey, the biggest man for Virginia Tech football currently as they're going through winter workouts, really no install or anything to that nature. So it's really just a lot of time in the weight room and training room. So Chuck Losey installing his plan to get these guys ready for the spring, summer, and into the fall season, as well with Jarrett Ferguson being retained, was the head strength and conditioning coordinator a year ago, was a little indecisive if he was coming back, but clearly coming back. So multiple analysts with head coaching experience added. You want to talk about Warren Ruggiero, talk about Danny Rocco, these guys who have seen it at a really high level for a long time. There's a lot of great minds on the staff that aren't specifically on the field, and they're getting compensated pretty well in those high $100,000 ranges for guys who have seen it at a high level. And I thought it was also really interesting to see Franklin really lean on the fact of blending Virginia Tech, the continuity that's already there, with Franklin's prior successes at other places. So trying to morph that and install his culture in a very brief amount of time. But it's a different age with the transfer portal, and it sort of frees you up to do some of that. If you're just joining, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like the video, drop a question in the live chat, going through some of James Franklin, Brent Pry, and the other coordinators' press conference, just initial reactions. We'll get into some facility upgrades and more. So make sure to subscribe and drop a question. We'll answer all those questions here in a little bit. But moving right along to the facilities and infrastructure part, Merriman, the athletic center over there, it's being transitioned into a football-only facility. And that was something that was to be expected when James Franklin came in. So now athletes from other sports now use separate entrances. On Monday's show, I believe I told you, nutrition has been completely moved out from the bottom. The training room is undergoing crazy renovations. They're completely transforming that space, and the access and ability to move around in that space is completely changing. Looks, feels, smells like big-time college football. So they've made changes, and not just signage or lights, but some bigger things are in the works. I thought it was interesting. Franklin said this facility, talking about Merriman, the bones are phenomenal, but definitely need some updating. And that was to be expected when he was to come in. The army of staff that he had was not going to be able to fit in Merriman, especially with all else that was going on in there. So continue to check up on Doug Bowman and changes that are coming, because there's going to be some infrastructure coming in the athletics district, and changes will certainly be coming. But some of those ongoing upgrades include lighting, inside, paint, like those are some minor things. Training room, LED lights in Lane Stadium will go a little bit more in depth. Heating the indoor, those are some of the larger scale, but Merriman is under constant, I guess, evolution at this point. I thought it was pretty funny. Selfishly, Franklin talked about viewing heating the indoor as a player safety and development issue. Specifically, talked about NFL scouts being in an ice box, which, selfishly, I think I'll revert to the clip that I posted the other time of the last show when I talked about being in there for a pro day and NFL scouts sort of getting on Pry's butt, telling him like, hey, we really need to heat this place. So Franklin doubled down on that, said soft tissue injuries are more susceptible in the cold. I gave the anecdote earlier on the Inside the Tunnel podcast. You heard cases of guys getting walking pneumonia. Franklin said he's never been in the indoor facility that didn't have heat. So definitely something top of the priority list. Very interesting. That's going to be an $8 million line item, and that building was not built with heating, let alone installation or the ability to add it relatively effectively and easily. Very interesting, but something that was going to change. And this was prior to even Franklin signing on, but something that was definitely going to happen either way. So that was interesting. And I thought it was funny that he specifically highlighted the NFL prep, especially with the scouts being there. As well, just tied in with that, said he wants to be one of the fastest teams in college football. We'll see. Chuck Losey, installing his weight plan, but, keeping guys healthy and safe throughout the winter definitely ties in with that. A couple more notes on press conference reaction, and we'll dump into some questions. So if you have a question, drop it in the live chat. Appreciate everyone joining. If you're just joining and you watched the live stream earlier of the press conference on the channel, I want to sincerely apologize again for the audio issues. We've got that sorted out, figured it out in like the last 15 minutes. So I know it was tough earlier, but I appreciate everyone sticking it out. We have it rectified for the future. But a couple more just talking points from the press conference, pulling at straws here. So they added 27 transfers plus 15 early enrolling high school guys. So Franklin really doubled down on fit, culture, and talked about alignment, as you would hear. Locker room guys, not just talent accumulation. Didn't just want pure talent profiles. You got to have a good locker room. So I think Franklin, kind of let it off by saying that the roster he inherited lacked sufficient competition. Really doubled down multiple times on saying he needed the legitimate 3 deep at every position. Starter you can win with, backup you can win with, and young player you're excited about to build out that 3 deep at every position. He reemphasized that point multiple times, saying he wants competition. There's nothing going to be given to the starter, that everything's going to be earned and someone's going to be on your heels trying to take it away from you. But at the same time, for the betterment of the program and creating that competitive culture that drives success in football and business and life. So certainly some changes he had to make there. And in one cycle, you bring in 27 transfers, 15 early enrollees, I believe 8 more joining in the summer. Pretty quickly flip the roster, still a ton of work to do moving forward. But in one cycle to do that, definitely a lot of work when you look at what they were able to do through the transfer portal. And then lastly, touching out some early feedback from players. As we touched on, James Franklin, he'd been limited with direct time from the players as he's been out on the road recruiting all of January, been out on the road, and then they were going to have the junior day, got snowed out. So he hasn't been back until last weekend with all the new players that are getting settled in for the semester. So feedback from the strength staff, the guys who have been with the players this whole time, as well with the leadership player council he's talked to, said it's been positive. And a quote that I ran in the story over on vtscoop.com. Like I said, you can go check it out. Two months for $1 or 50% off annual VIP subscription. vtscoop.com. Got one more day on that. But a quote I included in there that I thought was pretty impressive. Aiden Green, senior wide receiver, said the air even feels different in the building. So definitely changes and a whole different feeling around the program since Franklin came in a whole litany of ways. And the way the event got covered in a ton. I filmed the sort of behind the scenes day in the life today. I'm excited to show everyone. Hopefully I do a decent job when I roll that out about just sort of what it looks like covering college football, let alone as a student. So they've changed some processes, but overall, a pretty clean-cut press conference. If you have any questions, comments, dump in the live chat. We'll touch on those. Subscribe to the channel if you're new, like the video. And if you're here, make sure to share the show with 5 friends. Let's get the word out. Let's keep building this thing so we don't have any audio issues, so we can control that in the future. All right, moving right along, the next up on the docket, as Doug Bowman tweets right now, actually, is shout out Doug Bowman, who also got a shout out from the head coach, James Franklin, talking about you guys FOIA everything. And as the FOIA aficionado, I think he has to get his respect and credit for that. But particularly yesterday, breaking the news that LED lights will be coming to Lane Stadium, perusing purchase logs, and saw that on January 29th, Virginia Tech placed a $2.139 million order with MuseCo Lighting for Virginia Tech football Lane Stadium LEDs. This is project number 3 that was listed in Whit Babcock's initial Board of Visitors presentation. So the 3 known projects so far that are underway: heat indoor facility, so the RFP is out for that. Replace Lane Stadium's video board. The RFP bids closed for that, I believe, and now the LED lights have been purchased. And here on Kolby's Corner, hearing from multiple sources now that install is going to be starting within the next week. So something to keep an eye on, but something that will be in effect for the fall. In Babcock's initial presentation, this had it as a $2 million one-time expense. So that was sort of the confusion, but had it just a smidge north of that at $2.1 million. So within that range, and they followed that protocol pretty much to a T at this point with the indoor facility, Lane Stadium video board, and then LED lights. So that's the facility status. LED lights, as you see, that company did Auburn, a couple other schools. But when you look at the advantages of it in the recruiting draw, the fan experience draw, how Lane Stadium has honestly fallen behind probably in fan experience, something that Franklin and co will definitely address, but something that hasn't gone unnoticed. You bring that element, you already have a staple in Enter Sandman, right? You have different traditions, Let's Go Hokies, and a whole litany of other things that are already playing with you. You add another element to that, it can only help. When you see how Auburn has changed, Bryant Denny has completely changed their stadium experience. I think Bryant Denny is one of the best at doing it. Tennessee, Neyland Stadium has done an incredible job with LED lights. So just another asset for Virginia Tech to be a more appealing college football destination, which is at the end of the day what they're striving for. So that was most of the press conference reactions. Here was that LED RFP from EVA, the order, excuse me, not RFP, the order for LED lights from Virginia Tech. But I think that'll do it for now on reactions. Dump any questions you have in the live chat. We'll get to those, discuss any thoughts. Also, if you want to head over to vtscoop.com, I know I've been promoting it, but it's the best online community. You get 2 months of a VIP subscription for $1 or 50% off annual, and you get to submit questions exclusively for the show. So we had VT Hokie say, would love your take on how open the program is going to be regarding information compared to Brent Pry and Justin Fuente. I think it's a layered, nuanced response. Appreciate the question, VT Hokies. Information, I mean, everything else, I think it's a pretty big lockdown. Now, Justin Fuente is before my time, but you've heard stories of things being pretty locked down. I think Pry, was a happy medium, allowed some things, but was certainly restrictive at times. And obviously this last season when things changed a little bit, back was up against a wall, especially once Montgomery came in, practice availability went completely away. So I think it's a little bit to be seen. Franklin doubled down in the press conference today and said what's allowed this year, or it should not be the expectation for years to come, as they're still working through some of that. So I think information flow won't be hindered but so much, but it depends. Team information might be a little bit tighter, recruiting information. We'll see how that all comes out. But Not too much of a concern, except they're radically changing the processes for nearly everything. Entrance, scanning in, just every procedure that you could be imagine is being under review. So we'll see how that all shakes out. So it's a much tighter run organization, but I don't think that's leading to an information holdout. I think they've been trying to gather their bearings for a little bit. So that's why we haven't spoken to coaches in a month and a half. Also, not much has happened. So we'll see. Still scheduling an interview here with Josh Clark for another edition of Kolby's Corner. Conversation, sit-down interview. Excited for that. So we'll see how the requests flow. It could change radically in the next couple months, but as of right now, no real concerns or changes. All right, let's jump into some of these questions. Got Zorian Thomas in here saying, big upgrade from the whiteboard. Yeah, with the audio debacle today, I had people roasting me as well with the whiteboard. I kind of like that grungy feeling, as you can see it in the back there. But, we got the TV up here. It looks a little bit more professional. Had to up the game, especially with the fumble earlier in the day. So appreciate it. Got Denzel Jones in here. One of the last pods you spoke about conference realignment and the Virginia Tech SEC fit. Could they end up like Rutgers and Maryland being doormats to the conference? Yeah, you could certainly see that. But Vanderbilt used to be the doormat of the SEC, right? And they just went out and were 2 spots away from the college football playoff. Arkansas, I know, is down. But some of these programs, Indiana was a doormat of the Big Ten, right? Like you talked about Rutgers and Maryland there. Indiana, Purdue, those teams were doormats of the Big Ten as well. Indiana just turned that around. Now, I'm not to say that's easy. It's certainly not. Like what Indiana and Cristianetti did, I believe is being undervalued even still to this day. But I don't think you enter one of those leagues, you gain more resources. It's just you have to outclass, out-recruit, out-develop, and out-skill, talent, heart your opponents. So I think you've seen that like when Texas A&M joined the SEC and they went on and beat Alabama, in their first or second year? Yeah, it could happen, but I think that's more of a structural, organizational thing than just being a smaller brand joining a more prestigious conference. Good question, though. Hope that answered it. Got Andrew Lancaster. And this question was asked a couple times on the site. I'm going to delicately dance around this one. Any insight into why Rock Carmichael didn't seem happy with Brent Pry being back in the building? First off, shout out Rock Carmichael, has hooked it up in the past. Brent Pry, would love to have him on the show. So if you're watching, it's a shame that it's probably come out in this public forum that it has, which is tough. It really stems back to an issue where Rock was looking to join staff at Virginia Tech, and it got dragged out and eventually sort of fell through. So there's emotions on both sides of that, and obviously getting messy in the public square now, but that's kind of the long and short of it. Yeah. Got Jackson Woody in here, 8089. Was super impressed by Ty Howell today. What were your big takeaways from hearing from him for the first time? Yeah, I was also very impressed. And you sort of heard this, talking to different people, that were being recruited and had expectations of what the offense is. Like, yeah, it starts with the guys up front. You want to be explosive. But genuinely with the personnel and what he's been able to put together, I think this was an amazing out-of-the-radar hire. Now, he's never called plays full-time, but has developed and recruited at a very high clip, recruited at a super high clip, and he's been very involved with schematics. I thought he was extremely impressive talking about the offensive line. It's pretty funny, the anecdote of what his dad and his buddies coming up to look at the offensive line when practice comes open. And, I think he's got his guy at quarterback with someone he's familiar with, Danny O'Brien, as well, bringing Ethan Grunkmeyer. You bring in Luke Reynolds, someone I think they're very high on. He's already gotten great conversations with Aiden Green. This is an offense where, Penn State, it was very much Big Ten football between the tackles, bluegrass on the field, a little thicker, gets a little colder. Let's run the ball. Katron Allen, Nick Singleton. I think you hear them say they want to be explosive, and they want to push the ball down the field to get those one-on-one matchups, get the ball to your playmakers. They think they have a quarterback back there that can deliver the ball, and I think they've recruited guys, Aiden Green, Keyshawn Brown, Luke Reynolds, that can go up and make plays. So I think it's very exciting. It's very early, though. Nothing's been installed, and it's a whole new group of players. So a lot to be seen on that front, but I thought it was impressive as well. All right, with that, been a long day. A little bit of a shorter show. Thank you, everyone, for joining in here. Once again, if you're just catching at the end, I sincerely apologize again for the audio issues that occurred at the press conference. Our first time streaming it live here, so a little bit of technical difficulties, but we got it ironed out right at the end. So thank you for joining. Thank you for always commenting. Thank you for subscribing and supporting. It genuinely means the world. Getting to do what I love. And every time you do that, it helps me sort of take that next step, which means everything. So I appreciate it. Everyone have a great rest of your week. Have a safe weekend. Enjoy the Super Bowl. We will reconvene next Monday night unless something pops up in between now and then. But until then, stay safe. Peace out, and God bless.